Commodore, ang nag-uusap ngayon, pinag-uusapan ng gusto ngayon, yung order ng China to the China Coast Guard na pwede na silang manghuli ng mga trespassers within their maritime domain. Although ang alam ko naman ang Coast Guard nila actually empowered even to engage in combat maneuvers dahil military yan eh. Pero ano po ba ang mga reaction diyan sa Philippines tayo, Coast Guard natin, iba naman yung nature ng Coast Guard natin. Anong reaction sa ganyan? Kasi by June 15, pwede nang arrestin mga fishermen natin napapasok sa lugar na kiniklaim ng China.
Well, una sa lahat, ma'am, no? My personal take on this is we need to understand na ang China na naman, nag-issue na naman sila ng ganitong law nila actually to intimidate ang civil society natin. And it's not just the Philippines who is a target of this kind of advisory ng China. They're also afraid that countries like Vietnam, Malaysia will have a civil society initiative like what we did nito ni Ms. Rafaela. No? It's a very big problem for them kung hindi nila makukontrol ang civil society in different countries that will go against and challenge their 9-line claim. So, for my personal take on this, I don't think that they are really serious in implementing this. No, this is just another psyops na ginagawa nila para ma-discourage ang ating civil society for the Philippines and other countries. Kasi gaya ng sabi ko, it will be a very big problem for them.
Commodore, clearly this is a scaling up. Mukhang malinaw na nasasaktan yung China dito sa mga ragtag civilian convoy na ito, no? I know this is not your mandate, pero tingin nyo ba pag ginawa nila yan ay kailangan din nating i-counter? Pwede rin ba tayong maghuli, mag-detain ng mga, hindi lang poachers, no? Kung hindi yung mga fishermen nila na magko-cross sa ating territory. I'm sure kakabahan yan sa mga preso natin eh.
Well, Sir Ronald, I don't want to preempt the guidance of the National Task Force West Philippine Sea and, of course, our Commander-in-Chief. But whatever will be the instruction of General Eduardo Año as the chairman of NTFWPS, definitely the Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Gavan, will take the lead of General Año, sir.
Okay. Commodore, help us appreciate more the significance of this news coming from China, no? That was published in the South China Morning Post. My understanding is, talaga naman, di ba? Pag nag-trespassing, pwede hulihin ng Coast Guard. So, why this announcement? And they qualified it by adding that they can be arrested without trial. Ano po ibig sabihin nun?
Parang wala naman talagang trial sa China.
Yes, Commodore.
Well, totoo yan, sir, no? Totoo naman yung sinabi ni Sir Ronald, wala naman talagang trial sa China. So there's no reason na kailangan nila sabihin yun na you will be tried. But again, para sa akin, this is just a way for us to discourage ang ating civil society in having another civilian convoy. Dahil definitely nasasaktan nga sila rito. And then we need to go back, no? Yung 2020 na China Coast Guard law na sinasabi nila gagamit na sila ng use of force in responding to those people that will also trespass. Pero wala rin naman silang ginawa. Almost 4 years na yung Coast Guard law na yan, di ba? They're only relying on military grade laser, water cannon. So para sa akin, this kind of statement na inilabas nila on the day na nag-declare si Ms. Rafaela na mission accomplished tayo sa atin ito convoy is just for them to counter this kind of narrative para takutin ang civil society not just here in the Philippines but in the entire Southeast Asia.
Okay.
So, Commodore, you're saying actually nothing new naman yan sa powers ng China Coast Guard. Kasi nga nabanggit ko na rin na in fact doon sa bagay ng Coast Guard law na nabanggit nyo rin, they can actually engage in warfare. Yung Coast Guard nila is empowered to engage in combat maneuvers sa lugar na kiniklaim nila eh. So you're saying wala naman dito actually bagong power except nga na hinighlight lang ngayon ng South China Morning Post. na may ganong announcement yung China.
Yes, and of course, yung announcement nila na mang-arrest sila for 60 days ng detention, no? Ito lang yung bago dun sa sinasabi nila. But we should also understand, no, na the moment na gawin ng China to, it's actually more difficult for them to enforce. Kasi you have to deal with the Vietnamese fishermen, you have to deal with the Taiwanese, the Indonesian, the Malaysians. Kasi
Yes.
ang buong 9-line claim nila, sinasabi nila, that's theirs. Eh. So they have to deal with all of these countries. And it will create more problems than advancing their own interests.
Okay, Commodore Tarriela, I'm looking at the news from the Philippine Daily Inquirer online. Philippine Coast Guard detains vessel with 7 Chinese crew in Zambales town. Apparently, this happened yesterday. Do we have more details, Commodore?
Well, this is a Chinese Coast Guard vessel, no? That when we boarded, we have conducted the port state control, no? When you say port state control, it is the authority of the coastal state na mag-inspect ng safety compliance and MARPOL compliance ng isang foreign vessel sa kanyang waters. When we boarded this vessel, wala siyang naipakitang valid documents, no? To show the registration and compliance with different IMO conventions. So we are now coordinating with the Bureau of Immigration as well para ma-document itong mga Chinese nationals na crew nitong bangko na to.
So it's a merchant vessel, Commodore. It's a merchant vessel flying the Chinese flag. Ganun po ba yun?
Yes, sir. They are actually claiming na sila ay isang Chinese merchant vessel.
Okay, and the Chinese nationals, I think there are seven of them. They're now in Manila or still in Zambales?
They are still in Zambales. This vessel is actually reported to be a general cargo vessel.
Commodore, just in case na abutan nyo yung Chinese Coast Guard or militia in the act of apprehending Filipinos, no, lalo na kung ito ay bahagi ng civilian convoy in the future, ay kayo ba ay obligado na pigilan sila na gawin yon?
Well, the guidance of the President is very clear that the Philippine Coast Guard will continue our presence in the West Philippine Sea to safeguard the interest of the Filipino fishermen. And that includes harassment. No? Kasi para sa atin, we can actually categorically say na ang gagawin nilang ganito is actually harassment. Hindi naman talaga sila, they don't have legal reference to say na law enforcement function ang ginagawa nila dito, considering that this part of the West Philippine Sea is our exclusive economic zone, and the arbitral award has already invalidated the 9-line claim ng China. So wala silang international law backing to justify such operation. So on our part, this is just a harassment on the fishermen, and definitely the Philippine Coast Guard will carry out necessary action to prevent the Chinese Coast Guard from harassing our Filipino fishermen.
Okay, Commodore, I'd like to go back to this detained Chinese vessel, this detained Chinese cargo vessel. It says here that the vessel was intended was headed for Manila anchorage. I think it was, does this mean headed for Manila? However, due to high anchorage fees, they chose the more affordable anchorage, which is somewhere in Zambales. Ganun po ba yun? So this vessel is not trespassing. It's really headed for Manila, for the Philippines, to port in the Philippines. Ganun po ba yun?
Well, alam naman natin sa Port San Felipe, wala namang ports doon to be designated as anchorage area. So with that statement, it is obvious that they're just making an excuse, no? Na namamahalan sila sa anchorage fee sa Manila. Because there is no anchorage area in Port San Felipe. In San Felipe.
Okay. Do we know what sort of cargo this vessel was carrying?
Well, we deploying our Coast Guard K9 to look on the contraband dito sa barko na to. Wala naman silang dalang mga kargamento.
Wala. It's a cargo vessel
Wala.
that's empty. Parang ganon,
Wala
Commodore?
po, ma'am.
So ano daw ang gagawin nila if they were supposed to be going to Manila? It's a commercial vessel. Anong balak daw nila?
Well, that is something na kakaiba, no? That's why we boarded this.
Yes.
Kasi they also turned off their AIS. That's why it became a vessel of interest. The investigation is still ongoing and we're still trying to figure out kung ano talagang dahilan ng cargo vessel na to na mapunta ng Zambales.
Commodore, in the wake of the warning, well, yung report nga from the South China Morning Post, will the government be discouraging our fishermen from going siguro close to Panatag, for example? Or may impact ba yan sa fishing operations natin in the West Philippine Sea?
Well, if you're going to ask me personally, no, since I said wala pa naman tayong nakukuhang strict guidance or advisories on the NTFWPS, this kind of statement from China should just be ignored, no? Dahil alam naman natin, the 9-dash line claim was already invalidated. This kind of enacted domestic law ng People's Republic of China is basically illegal, no? So there's no reason for us to tell our fishermen kasi parang sinabi na natin na we are respecting itong kanilang decision na to and that we submit ourselves dito sa kanilang advisory na ganito. So for us, our fishermen should not be prevented from going to the West Philippine Sea or even this kind of civil society initiative for convoy.
Halimbawa, Ami, yung mga fishermen kahapon na na-interview, tinaboy sila doon
Yes.
sa around Panatag. Parang hindi naman sila makakalapit talaga sa Panatag Shoal. Tinaboy sila at
Yes.
ang ginawa nila, pumunta na lang sila doon sa civilian convoy at doon sila naghumingi ng supply, gasolina, pagkain, etc. Pero ang sabi nila ay babalik sila uli next week, no? Doon paano pa na sila 2 weeks na sila sa laot no? Kaya kinakailangan nila ng supply. So, in a way, successful yung supply mission, successful yung pagtaboy sa kanila ng China, pero sila ay babalik uli. No? I-assert nila yung kanilang karapatan. Maganda yung interview sa mga fishermen.
Commodore, may isa pang development ngayon. I understand the Philippine Coast Guard has signed yung ng agreement with Japan to procure five new patrol boats. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, ma'am. No? Itong 5 97-meter vessels na to ang in-announce ng ating Pangulo noong November last year na na-approve na ng NEDA board. No? 97-meter vessel. Meron na tayong dalawang ganitong malaking barko. Kung maalala mo, ma'am, we've been mentioning in the last press conferences na meron tayong 97-meter na naka-standby ngayon sa Skoda Shoal. Today, 31 days na nandun ang Coast Guard vessel natin. So we need this kind of vessels na malalaki for us to have a prolonged presence in the West Philippine Sea.
Commodore?
Ito yung pinakamalaking vessel ng Coast Guard, 97 meters.
Yes, ma'am. And yung 5 na yan, ma'am, ang ina-expect nating i-procure ulit Japanese government. So try to imagine 5 more of those na dadagdag sa kakayahan ng Philippine Coast Guard will definitely boost our capability in maintaining our presence in the West Philippine Sea.
Okay, Commodore, I've heard it said somewhere that the Philippines is poised to become the largest Coast Guard in Southeast Asia at least. Are we anywhere near that, Commodore?
Well, if we're going to receive the 5 97-meter vessels, then there's a possibility that we can be the biggest Coast Guard fleet in the entire Southeast Asia. Pero we should also consider the fact that building their Coast Guard capability together with MMEA, which is the Malaysian Coast Guard, no? Because not a single country in Southeast Asia would like to deploy gray ship in the South China Sea. Dahil sa paniniwala natin, we don't need to militarize it.
Okay.
Kung kaya ang China nga din, nagpalaki ng China Coast Guard, although the mandates of the China Coast Guard doesn't align with our understanding of what a Coast Guard organization should be.
On a different note, Commodore, about Sandy Cay, no, marami kasing lumabas na statement this past few weeks from Secretary Gibocho Doro, Secretary Anyo, Secretary Manalo, kung gaano ka-importante yung ginagawa ngayon ng China dito sa Sandy Cay. At posible, kung yung plano nila ay magpapatuloy, gagamitin nila ito to measure their territorial water, undermining the territorial water o Pag-asa, and measuring their EEZ from that territorial water. No? Pero di ba ang Sandy Cay nasa border o nasa labas ng ating EEZ? Paano ba natin, ano yung magiging strategy at saka conduct natin diyan para mapigilan yung insidious plot ng China?
Well, Sir Ronald, no? Alam mo naman na ang Pag-asa is also outside our exclusive economic zone. But Pag-asa has always been occupied by the Philippine government for a very long time, no? And the Sandy Cay is within the territorial sea of Pag-asa.
Yes.
And it also overlaps dito sa Subi Reef na nireclaim ng China din mula 2013 to 2016. So on our part, for the Coast Guard and the Armed Forces of the Philippines, we have been monitoring ang mga ganitong activity ng China and ensuring na hindi nila magiging successful in carrying out small-scale reclamation. That is the reason why, as early as now, we have already exposed this illegal action of China.
Okay, I'm just wondering,
Commodore,
no? We seem to be, of all the claimants in the West Philippine Sea, the Pag-asa area, no, Spratlys area, we seem to be finding ourselves more in conflict with China. I wonder if it's because we are in critical or strategic areas, we're positioned in there, or is it because of other reasons? Like, tayong pinakamahina or something like that. I just wonder, Commodore.
Or pinakamalapit sa US.
O pinakamalapit sa US, pwede rin yun.
The main reason kung bakit lang naman natin na pag-uusapan, no, ang aggression ng China in the West Philippine Sea, it's because we choose to publicize it. But I don't believe that it's only the Philippines that experienced the swarming of the Chinese maritime militia, the illegal presence of the Chinese Coast Guard, because we know for a fact the Chinese Coast Guard are also being deployed in exclusive economic zone within Paracel in Vietnam and also in Lucuña Shoal in Malaysia.
Okay.
So whatever we are experiencing, these countries are also experiencing. The only difference is that they don't tend to expose this kind of actions.
Okay, so it's a deliberate strategy on the part of the Philippines.
Well, the world knows na nag-employ nga ang China ng gray zone tactics using its Coast Guard sa kaya mga militia. And I also understand na pag pinag-uusapan na yan ng different countries, including the Quad, may nabubuo na ba na mga ideas how to deal with this? Any new measures to deal with it? Hindi naman confrontation, pero how to deal with China's use of these tactics?
Well, I won't be responding on the details, no, that is being discussed by other allies. But let me highlight the fact that the contribution of the transparency strategy of the Philippine government with respect to China's aggressive behavior is that for so long a time, no, we always try to describe Chinese action in the West Philippine Sea as gray zone tactics. No? Even maritime security scholars have been mentioning this as gray strategy, short of war approach of China. But since we use transparency, we're not using this as gray zone. We're calling this all out, no? Na this is just a violation of the international law. This is an outright display of China not respecting the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. Whether they use water cannon or military-grade laser or violate the collision regulation, for us, the aggression and the presence of Chinese Coast Guard and Chinese maritime militia is just simply put violation of international law, and they are offenders of the international law.
Commodore, nabasa ko kanina yung paborito kong columnist sa Manila Times, si Bobby Tiglao. At sabi niya kanina ay kayo daw ang nasa likod ditong civilian convoy. No? Ano bang tingin niyo doon? May basihan ba yon?
Alam mo, Sir Ronald, minsan natatawa ako kapag napag-uusapan natin yung kaibigan natin na to. Again, ayoko na mag-respond sa mga sinasabi niya. No? Kahit sa Twitter, di ko na rin siya pinapatulan. Ang sabi ko nga sa kanya, since wala rin namang Senate inquiry pa, ang pinakamagandang activity para ma-realize niya kung anong tama at mali, magpa-family reunion siya. Tanungin niya yung mga anak niya or yung mga apo niya or mga pamangkin niya kung nasa tamang direksyon pa siya ng paniniwala sa mundo. I think our fight in the West Philippine Sea will enlighten him kapag nakapag-usap siya sa kabataan at sabihin niyang ang ipinaglalaban niya mas tama sa tinitindigan natin sa West Philippine Sea.
Okay, Commodore, back to Ami's point a while ago, no? If we can call this as Grayson strategy, no, what China is doing in the West Philippine Sea, would measured transparency, I think I first heard this term from Assistant Director General Malaya, would measured transparency be the counter strategy of the Philippines?
Well, first of all, no, I would like to give a much more clear understanding of what we do. Para sa akin, I always react when people say it's an assertive transparency. We don't need to over-assert, no? Para tayo nagiging OA kapag transparency nilagyan mo ng assertive, no? I don't also agree when people say measured transparency dahil para mangyayari yan, you are cherry-picking a particular information that you tell to the public.
Okay.
So, I think what AGC Malaya means is transparency, no? The transparency because we don't cherry pick, we don't exaggerate things, we don't lies, we don't make lies, we don't fabricate things. Lahat lang na sinasabi natin sa media, sa publiko ay parang katotohanan lamang. And then secondly, ang tanong sir kung is it only the transparency strategy that we will use in countering China? It is not just the one-all-be-all strategy that we are engaging in the West Philippine Sea. No? We can probably say this is the foundation of our approach in addressing Chinese aggressive action because from the transparency, we have already engaged international community wherein we can build a strong alliance, support for the modernization, also for the economic and trade cooperation. It all started with transparency. So, in short, it's wrong to think that transparency is the only way to go for us to counter Chinese aggressive action. Transparency is only one of those strategies that the national government and NTF-WPS is doing in response to Chinese aggressive action.
Commodore, napanood ko kahapon sa video at mga pictures yung Chinese Coast Guard na nilapitan yung dalawang pangulong kasama sa convoy 80 meters away. Halos nakadikit na siya. Di ba delikado yon? At ano yung pwedeng gawin ng Coast Guard sa ganung klaseng mga sitwasyon? Dahil halos sagasaan na yung dalawang pangulong no, ng civilian convoy.
Well, for the Philippine Coast Guard, our protocol really, every time we have rotational deployment in Bajo de Masinloc, and there are Filipino fishermen na maaaring ma-jeopardize ang kanilang safety, no? We immediately challenge China Coast Guard, and at some point, we make sure na we can still assert yung pangkaligtasang ng ating mga mais ng Pilipino. Either we distract them by the Philippine Coast Guard choosing to get closer in the Chinese Coast Guard, or we launch our rigid hull inflatable boat para siguraduhin ligtas ang ating mga kababayang Filipino mangingisda.
Commodore, kailan dadating? When are you expecting the 5 ships from Japan?
The 597 meters, ma'am?
Yes, yung 97 meters. Kasi nagpirmahan na daw ng deal eh. Mga kailan kaya yun dadating?
Yes, ma'am. Hopefully, it will be delivered by 2027. At
Galing
least
pa dun,
the first 97 meter na magagawa.
Okay, Commodore, are we getting
Galing pa.
anything from the United States? Commodore?
Hello? Hello?
Yes, yes. Are we getting anything
Yes.
from the United States? I mean, in terms of aid or equipment?
Well, there are talks for the Philippine Coast Guard to also receive vessels from the U.S. Coast Guard, no? But it's also worth mentioning na ang U.S. Coast Guard naman has been very engaging to the Philippine Coast Guard in our capability building through education and training. Most of our Coast Guard personnel now are almost every month, no? Pumupunta sa Amerika para magkaroon ng capability training when it comes to ship handling, ships repair, all those kind of stuff that would develop the capability of our human resource in professionalizing the Coast Guard organization.
Okay. Ami, if we don't have any questions, anyway, thank you, Commodore J. Tarriela, spokesman of the Philippine Coast Guard. Thank you for your time.